Thank you for joining me for this episode of God Talk. And on this episode of God Talk, it's going to actually be a two-part series of God Talk. And the theme of both podcasts are the great lie. And what I want to talk about this week, on week one, number one of the great lie, is basically virtual reality and deepfakes and how that impacts us in terms of our faith and really the future of civilization itself. Now, I think to get into this topic, we need to talk about free speech and what we're allowed to say and what we're not allowed to say. And this has always been a very personal subject to people, especially in America, because we pride ourselves on having free speech. We've always had free speech. Well, that is until probably the last 5 years or so. Speech has been limited a lot more than ever before in our history. In fact, I'm sensitive on this topic because of what I saw take place during COVID, in which speech was intentionally being filtered, intentionally being curtailed, and you were only allowed to hear one version of what was going on with COVID. And that's just not American. That is like communist. That is what you would get from China. That's what you get from Russia and from all of these authoritative states. And we were only able to hear one narrative. And as a result, the way that we handled it was completely wrong. When you lose a diversity of opinion, that's never a good thing. I'm a pastor of a church. If I surround myself with other staff that just think exactly like me or are going to just say what I say, that's not a good thing. If you surround yourself in a business with a board of directors that's just going to simply tell you what you want to hear and say the same thing that you say, that's not a good thing. A good thing is when you hear a diversity of ideas. And from that diversity of ideas, a better idea will come forth. I'm the first to tell people around me, I'm going to reject 90%, and I don't think I'm exaggerating. I'm going to be rejecting 90% of the other ideas I hear because I tend to like mine. But I will accept about 10% of them. And I'm here to tell you, like, that 10% can make a huge difference. Maybe I should accept 25, 30% of them. I don't know what the appropriate amount is, but to not allow a diversity of ideas will always limit your end product. And that's what went on in this country during COVID and really since. You have developers and the owners and the people running these large social media and different companies like that in the United States, specifically like, say, Facebook, and it used to be Twitter. It's not really this way with X anymore. The reason Elon Musk bought Twitter was so that there would be a significant form of media out there that people would hear the truth of what everyone is saying. He saw it as being like a town hall discussion where you're hearing viewpoints from everyone. And so we have that now on X. And there are maybe a couple others that are doing it, and maybe Facebook has moderated some, but ultimately they still kind of control the narrative. And this becomes a very dangerous thing. You see it in just how politics is covered. You see it in how abortion's covered, or LGBTQ, or any of these different things in which there's a difference of opinion. There's an intentional manipulation of the message that's going to be heard, and if you're going to hear the other side, it's going to be a very distorted view. And once again, it's not a good thing. So free speech is important, but there's no absolute right to free speech. And I know some of you are freaking out when I say there's no absolute right to free speech. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm not allowed to come up and tell you, leave a voicemail, send you an email that says, I've kidnapped your child, and I've kidnapped them because you failed to pay the IRS. Just making this up as I go. You failed to pay the IRS the right amount of taxes over the last 10 years. Your child is going to be put into a slave debtor's prison for the next 20 years unless you pay me by midnight tonight a good faith effort of $5,000, $50,000, $500,000, whatever, at which point then we will consider this matter closed and your child will be returned. I'm not allowed to do that. I'm not allowed to extort you in the name of free speech. Like, I could claim, listen, it's free speech. I can say whatever I want. You're not allowed to do that. To put it more realistically, you get those emails, you get those texts, you get those messages where it says your UPS package has been held up because there's not been proper payment made, and these are all scams that people do to steal from us. You're not allowed to say whatever you want. There's laws that prevent you from doing that, to take advantage of other people and to steal from other people and to hurt other people and to harm other people. That's where the right to free speech, it's not all encompassing. And this isn't anything new. There's always been the standard of free speech. Free speech is somewhat universal, except you're not allowed to do certain things. And the criteria that was used for many years is you can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater. I mean, once again, you can claim that's free speech. I can yell whatever I want in that crowded movie theater. No, you can't. Because if you yell fire in that crowded movie theater, what you're going to end up doing is causing hurt and harm on people. You're going to cause death potentially on people as people start trampling over each other and running for the door. So listen, I'm a huge proponent of free speech. But where free speech causes confusion to the point that it manipulates people to their harm, to their detriment, to their loss of life, money, health, wealth, and property, that's when it's not allowed. And here's my problem, is when we get into the realm of virtual reality, when we get into the realm of deepfakes, I think this is an area of free speech that it's not free. If we're going to keep allowing this to go on the way it's taken off in the last few years, there's going to be a lot of harm and hurt and detriment that's going to come as a result of it. And what I'm speaking about specifically is like, I don't know, and most of the people I know, we don't know what's real and what's not when images are forwarded to us anymore. And so I have to dismiss them all, because it's better to not believe something happens than to believe something did happen that didn't happen, because there's a little less confusion if you just don't believe it to begin with. Versus if you believe everything that comes your way, you're going to be a really confused individual. And that confusion is ultimately what's going to destroy relationships. It's going to divide communities. It's going to divide nations. It's going to divide the world. And I really think it's going to bring the end of the world as we know it. And I'm not trying to be overly dramatic here. I need you to just follow me, though. How do wars start? Wars start because either one person wants something someone else has, or wars start as a result of confusion. I think you're my enemy, but you don't see yourself as my enemy. We don't talk, and a confusion develops, and a mistrust and a hatred, and then we go to war. Well, with deep fakes and virtual reality and artificial intelligence, how easy is it going to be to breed that confusion into relationships from nation to nation? How are we going to know if, like, Russia is really messing with our elections or trying to breed discontent into society or not? Like, if it's done well in virtual reality, we wouldn't have any clue, right? But they could, and we could to others. And is that something worth going to war for? Sure. If I think that you're doing something to create discontent in this country, which might lead to civil war in this country, which might lead to the collapse of this country, as a leader, I've got the responsibility to protect this country. We may go to war over that. With deep fakes and virtual reality and artificial intelligence and all of that, how hard is it to turn a country against itself, even from within the country, when there's people in the country that are acting nefariously and would like to see the country go to war against each other because we don't like the other side. So the only way that we're going to solve that is by going to war against the other side. So we actively do things to create that mistrust and that confusion. How easy is it going to be to get someone fired from work because you make it look like they did something that they never did? How easy is it going to be to turn one person against another person, even in a community? How hard would it be to send some image to your coworker that you don't like, or some neighbor that you don't like, and it shows a third person raping or beating, his daughter or his spouse. And listen, when you see that stuff and you believe it to be true, you don't call up the guy and say, "What in the world do you think you're doing?" You go and you take a revenge. You go and kill the guy. You don't ask questions when there's that much hate that's going to be involved. When you think you see someone doing something to a close family member of yours, you see where I'm going with this is like, how do we keep how do we keep society from turning on itself? How do we keep, whether that be a large group of people or a handful of people, from sowing confusion into many different aspects of society that will cause society to literally explode like a powder keg over misunderstandings and confusion and false reality? We're just at the forefront of this. Where's this going to be in 20 years? And with that power, and maybe that power even rests in just an ordinary person sitting behind the screen of a computer in his parents' basement. Oh, I think it was during Ronald Reagan, like there was almost a nuclear war because the Soviets thought we launched a nuclear weapon at them. And Reagan found out that the Soviets had opened their silos and prepared them to launch back at us. And he had to decide whether or not he was going to open the silos to prepare to launch back to them. And it turns out that, like, Reagan and our channels are trying to tell them we haven't launched. But for them, it looked like we launched, and they only have so long to respond if we did launch before they lose the opportunity to meaningfully respond. Well, thankfully they didn't. And it turned out, I think it was like a flock of birds or something that was messing with their computer system and their surveillance system. We almost had nuclear war because of a misunderstanding. How does this not destroy God's creation soon in the next 25 to 50 years? It's confusion that destroyed God's creation the first time, isn't it? Think about Satan. God created the world perfectly, but Satan, in essence, destroyed that creation or significantly ruined it through confusion. He comes to Adam and Eve, to Eve actually, and he says, "Well, did God really say that you shouldn't, eat of it and you shouldn't touch it?" And he begins to question what God said, and then Eve said, "Well, yeah, God said, we shouldn't do this." And Satan's like, "Well, God just doesn't want you to be like him. God just doesn't want you to have the knowledge of good and evil because he doesn't want you to be like him." And so what did Satan do? He sowed confusion into Eve's mind as to the nature of who God is and why God did what God did. As a result of that confusion, there was mistrust. As a result of that mistrust, she ate of the fruit and then she gave it of Adam, and creation was ruined. It was destroyed. The next destruction of creation might be confusion as well. And it is a confusion, the first confusion in the Garden of Eden. Satan, who's known as the father of lies, was behind that. I can't help but think that Satan sees his opportunity because he is the father of lies, and he is now going to be able to sow the seeds of confusion in a way that he has never been able to do before. And I don't see how humanity can withstand it. I hope I'm being overly pessimistic, but I don't see how we can, unless somehow we make it impossible to do or punishable, and you really punish people for putting these lies out there, where you're saying something that isn't true and you're selling it to be true with your lies and virtual reality. Like if that's punishable by time in jail, and depending on what the lie is, significant time in jail, well, then people aren't going to do that anymore. Then a lot of people aren't going to steal from the grocery store or rob a bank and all these other things that we try to deter people from doing. There's got to be a deterrent. If there's no deterrent, God help us. And it's going to come quick, maybe before even the end of my lifetime. And I can't even project out 50 years from now what it looks like if everyone has the power and the ability to deep fake. So I said this is going to be a 2-part series. The first part I've talked to you about, and the first part of the Great Lie is just virtual reality and deep fakes and confusion and the effects that that's going to have on society. Well, next week when I talk to you, I want to talk to you about a second part of this great lie that exists out there, and it's one that's really kind of starting to make its way into church. And I have to be honest, it's scaring me a lot. And it's the simulation theory. It's that life itself is almost a deep fake. That this isn't real. And there's a lot of people in the church that I'm starting to hear this from, not just in the church, but that are teaching in the church. And that's really messed up. It's really messed up. And we're going to talk about that next week on God Talk. Thank you for joining me for this episode of God Talk. And I hope you have a wonderful day and a good rest of your week. God bless.